now in Colorado Springs. So that was quite an exciting symposium. His speech there, I thought, was one of the best speeches I had ever heard at one of these events. He said things that just kind of changed my mind about a lot of issues that I've had about developing free energy. So that's why I consider Dan one of our more important speakers today. He's been into advanced scientific concepts for a long time, for most of his life. While he was in high school, he developed interest in the works of Tesla, Keeley, and Moray. That was pretty rare for anybody to do that in high school. At that time, he began experimenting with electronics. He was looking for a method to produce free energy and understand the basis for gravity. He has pursued a career in electrical engineering and atomic physics. He switched majors in his senior year and got his degree in mathematics from the University of California in Santa Barbara. Since then, he's continued his research in advanced physics concepts and has written a book on free energy research and theories. He's an expert on computers. He's designed several supercomputer systems targeted for the signal image processing market to process acoustic, visible, and infrared images. He's also worked extensively on radar, sonar, and laser systems. At the moment, he owns his own computer consulting company. He does experimental research in his free time on free energy, atomic physics, and medical electronics. Please give a good welcome to Dan Davidson. Okay. Free temporary tie clip. And I'll get these t-shirts out of your way.
For a minute there, I was looking around to see who he was talking about. Thank you very much, Michael. I'm going to talk today about the Gary magnetic effect. This was kind of an interesting thing. About a year ago, a friend of mine gave me an old patent by Mr. Gary, and I had never seen the phenomena that was described in the patent before. And next slide. So today I'm going to give a brief history of Mr. Gary, the Gary effect, give a little bit of what I think is probably the theoretical basis for it, and then some of the current research that I'm working on. My company is called Revis, so if you see that name here and there, that's what it is. Next. Mr. Gary was born in New York. He was the son of a clergyman, and his father was very interested in inventions, even though he was in the clergy. And his father used to give talks on some of the current inventions of the day. One of them was a telegraph, and this kind of fired up Wesley's inventive curiosity, and he became, I guess he had a natural proclivity, you might say, for inventions and inventive ideas. But because his father was in the clergy, he was almost expected to go into that profession. But instead he became a lumberman, which was kind of strange because of his great abilities and inventiveness. But because of the environment and everything he was in back then, he got rheumatism, and he was forced to abandon the lumber business. And the doctor, who was also a good friend of the family, suggested that he follow this natural capability that he had in invention. And so he did do this, and he worked for 4 years to find a cutoff for a magnetic field. And as a lot of you know, today there really is no effective cutoff except for a Faraday type cage or putting it in a ferro shield that totally enclosed the magnet. So when I saw the initial concepts that were espoused in the Gary patent, I was quite interested in the thing, and I did some initial testing on it. One of the things that Gary found was that a soft iron keeper moved in front of the magnet at a certain point in the field would become neutralized. Next slide. This is a cartoon of the Gary effect. Up here I've depicted a neutral line. This neutral line can move up and down depending on the type of keeper material, the thickness of it, and I'm going to show that in a few minutes. If you move a keeper into this neutral line with the right properties, it will be totally neutralized. There will be no magnetic field induced into the keeper. If you move this keeper above the neutral line, it'll become charged opposite to the pole that it's below. So if you got a north, you'll have a south when it's above the neutral line, and conversely on the other side. If you move this keeper down below the neutral line, the polarity of the keeper will change state and go from north to north and south to south. Now this was kind of an unusual effect, so I had an uncalibrated Gauss meter, and I tested this. This is one of Gary's early concepts for showing how the effect worked. He had a couple of magnets, one here that was free to rotate on an axis, and then he had a stationary magnet over there, and then he had a keeper, C, that he could move up and down by pressing on this lever here. And if he moved this keeper up and down where it was situated on front of the neutral line, the two magnets would attract each other, and then when he'd move it away, it would go away. So he was effectively blocking the magnetic force that was coming off of this magnet, so that there wasn't enough force to keep this thing suspended, and it would drop back down onto the board here that it was situated on. This was his first, his patent. It gives the patent number up there. That was the United States patent number. He also got a Canadian patent, which is 7572. And one of the questions that was asked by one of the well-known electricians of the day is, have you ever attained sparks, in playing with this magnetic effect that you've discovered? And Mr. Gary said yes, and this triggered some more of that inventive genius that he had, and he came up with what he called a dynamo to replace current dynamos that were in use, such as the Tesla effects and things that are being used at Niagara Falls at the time. And what it was a keeper that moved in and out of the neutral line of the magnetic field of the magnet here. He had a coil here that, since the magnetic field here was changing as it moved back and forth across the neutral line, it would induce electricity in this coil. And he had this lever arrangement which would, if you crank this wheel over here, this cam action would move this lever arm here back and forth, which would move the keeper up and down inside the magnet. Since I was quite interested in this effect, I did some preliminary measurements with a Gauss meter, and it showed the effect was there, and I was quite nonplussed because I'd never seen any of this in the literature. So what I did was I ordered a real good Gauss meter that allowed me to get within 0.3 of a Gauss and 3,000 Gauss, which is a fairly respectable calibrated Gauss meter. It was one of the Hall effect devices. What I did was I took measurements. I took a measurement first without the magnet, without the keeper, pardon me, and I measured directly the magnetic field that was on the poles of the magnet. And then I took and I did a series of experiments where I moved the keeper from right on within a few hundredths of an inch on the surface of the magnetic poles on away from it. And I took measurements at that point right here on top of both of the poles so that I could see the polarity changing. Now this particular graph here, oops, thank you. This particular graph here shows the magnetic flux that I measured without a keeper, and this was about an 800 Gauss magnet if you move this up into fully touching the magnetic pole. This happened to be, I think, the first distance that I was actually using to set the keeper in, so I started it from there. The graph actually goes out quite a ways. I measured it quite a ways out, but it just continues on, gradually decreasing as you go over and further away from the magnetic poles. It isn't in this picture. That was without a keeper. Okay, here is the... Okay, the keeper is just a soft piece of iron. That's all it is. This is a piece of soft keeper. It was 0.096 inches thick, soft steel. And what I did was I moved the keeper across, I moved the keeper gradually away from the magnet, and as I did this I measured the magnetic field on both of the poles. And then I plotted this, and you can see the results, that up here at about 1/10 of an inch, the field does cross from one side to the other. I tried this with different thicknesses of keepers, and you can see that this keeper was twice as thick as the other one, and before the other one was at about 1/10 of an inch, which is where here? Yeah, it's quite a ways down. So you can see that the crossover point is moved much closer to the poles of the magnet. Next one. Now this one here, this was with the same magnet all the way through, 800 Gauss. I took 3 times the thickness of the original keeper, and an interesting effect occurred here, which I had not read about in any of the literature or anything, was that the overall magnetic force shifted toward the negative side of the negative pole of the magnet. And because I didn't have any thinner pieces of shim to put between the keeper and the magnet, this was as close as I get, but as near as I could tell, it didn't seem that there was a crossover point when the keeper became this thick. Next. Then I tried much stronger magnet. This was 10 times stronger. This is an 8,000 Gauss magnet. All these magnets were Alnico 5, and I think most of them were out of Klystrons, very powerful magnets. This particular one, 8,000 Gauss, moved the keeper across there. This was the thin keeper in this case, and I tried it with different keepers, and it didn't seem to make any difference. The magnet was so powerful that it was effectively overcoming the neutral line effect that I was seeing. So there is some tuning that you have to do if you're going to play with this with respect to keeper size and magnetic field strength. If you get it too strong, you're probably not going to get the neutral line effect. If you follow this out, I could not detect any crossover. I took the graph quite far out when I did the measurements, but there was no crossover that I could detect with a very strong magnet. Next. I also made a simple little test jig to test his free energy motor. He claimed that you could get a lot more energy out of the dynamo than you put into it. If in other words, that previous thing I was showing where you crank the thing to cause the keeper to move back and forth, that you'd actually get free energy out of it. And I attempted to make a crude test of this. I don't have very much machining equipment, so it was rather crude. It still was accurate enough to really test the effect. And what I did was I took 2 different tests. I had a version 1 where I had the keeper moving back and forth through the neutral line, and it essentially floated within a small space inside the coil. And I didn't get very much power out of it. And so I thought, well, maybe I needed closer coupling for the keeper to the coil, so I made a new one where I attached the keeper right to the coil, where the whole coil and the keeper moved back and forth across the neutral line. And it turned out that the power differences were almost identical in the 2 cases. So I came to the conclusion that this particular configuration would probably not get any kind of free energy out of it. It was so low power that it was really disappointing. You know, when you read these patents and they say you're going to get free energy and you don't get anything, you know, you think you got the world by the tail, and then it comes down crashing down. But anyhow, one of the things that I really decided when I started looking at this closer was that there is a very strong magnetic field across here. And even though you're inducing a good strong field across this keeper into the coil, it effectively gets canceled by the coil being inside the U part of the magnet. So pardon me, right up here. So what happens is, as you move this back and forth, any energy that gets induced in here effectively gets canceled by the strong magnetic field that's going around inside of this. I think there could be a lot of tests that could be done by moving the coil outside of the center of the magnet and just having for example, a keeper that is rectangular in shape that went around something like that, and put the coil around the outside out here so that it's not influenced by this canceling effect. And I haven't gotten to that point where I can do that experiment yet, but that would be a logical next step. The fact that the effect is there is unknown to science. I showed this to several people at one of the places where I'm doing consulting. One is a PhD in physics, and the other is a PhD in double E, and he had never heard of the effect, neither one of them. So it's quite an interesting effect. It does produce a way of shielding magnetism without any appreciable amount of shielding that you need if you just get it right in that neutral line point. Excellent. Now, as far as the theoretical effects go, I got to thinking about how this thing may be working. If you look at a keeper that's above the neutral line, you've effectively, this is the polarity that you measure on it when it's above the neutral line. And if you think about how the domains are oriented in the magnet, in this keeper, pardon me, in the keeper at that point, you essentially got all the domains lined up, south, north, etc., through the whole magnet. Whereas if you move the keeper in the unpolarized state, what's happening is that the forces that exist in this picture and in this picture are somehow or another canceling each other. In other words, there's a fight going on inside here if you think about these domains fighting each other, and they can't get their act together and line up in one direction. Whereas down in here, the magnetic field is so strong that it lines up the domains in this direction. You get for example, if you got a north here, you're going to have a south, which would obviously be in the right direction for it, and all the domains would line up in that direction. And this side, you'd have the same type of effect. You'd have a south here and a north here, etc. And because of the polarity difference between these two, the domains would gradually change as you went across the keeper from one side to the other. So that, to me, is the theoretical explanation. Now, this is some of the research that I'm doing currently. We've done some calculations on ways to switch magnetic fields electronically rather than doing it mechanically. Whenever I look at some of these mechanical Rube Goldberg nightmares, and the Gary effect is a relatively simple one, usually you end up with a lot of losses mechanically. And so what I tried to do is come up with a way of using this effect electronically, and I also found this at the same time. About a month ago, I received this in the mail from a fellow researcher in free energy, and he claims that with this device, which in effect uses an aspect of the Gary effect, he was getting 100 OUO. Now, nobody's ever talked about 100 OUO in any of the free energy devices I've seen. That's 100 times out versus in. So I analyzed this particular device, and actually the theoretical efficiency of this thing is something like 63,000 to 1. And if you've got losses in this special core material, it's possible that those losses could drop you down into this range. But it looks like it may even be more effective than this. I'm currently doing experiments on this particular device. What it does is you've got the whole key is a special core which provides a variable reluctance. And this device in the center here is a permanent magnet. And what you do is these coils here switch the field of this magnet, which is usually going around on the outside, to follow through the core. And it takes very little energy, it turns out, if you got the proper core material, to switch this core from, switch the field that's coming from here to go through here rather than to go around. So the way this thing works is you alternately pulse these crossed coils to get free energy out of it. So I'm running some experiments right now to see it. I've got a situation where I'm building up an experiment for it. If anything comes of it, I certainly tell everybody. Thanks. Let me keep going. You can ask later. If you get down into some of the atomic structure, one of the previous talks, they said that the atom is, and the electrons are all down there, they're basically running free energy already. And if you get down into the inner structure of an atom, you'll find that there are energy flows that actually come in and sustain the atom and come back out. Now, a lot of this research was proved in the early days by John Keeley and later by some of the other researchers. It's also becoming more accepted in the free energy fields where what I call the T field, which is a Tesla field, energy flows into an atomic structure and back out. And these flows, if you add them all together inside of an atomic structure, if they're all lined up, you can get a very strong magnet. And that's essentially what you're doing with a magnetic field. If you look at clairvoyants have also observed this energy flowing in and out of magnetic fields. So you get a higher frequency, which is a blue on the North Pole, and a lower frequency, which is a red on the South Pole. And it turns out that the difference in energy between those, and we've done some of the basic atomic research to prove this, is that the energy to sustain the mass and to sustain the electrons and the particle itself, all the particles that make up the mass, is the difference in energy between these two flows. Now, it turns out that you can manipulate these flows and do various things with them and gain energy out of it. Preliminary investigation where we've done some magnetic field strength tests. There's a difference in north-south pole strength of 3 to 5%. And this also fits in with the theoretical differences. Now, I haven't got a huge amount of magnets to test this with, but the magnets that I do have proved this out. They're all about right in this range. This also fits with some work by some researchers in Europe named Dr. Nieper. One of the things that, if you get into this theory, I mentioned Keeley and Einstein, some of these have worked on these ideas. Feynman came up with a basic structure of the neutron. It was 3 particles here. I think it was 2 or 3 quarks, or 2 quarks and a charm. Don't remember quite what it was. But this exact same structure was proposed by Keeley back in the last part of the last century. And one of the things that Keeley said was that you could manipulate these flows with sound energy and produce effects in the atomic structure itself. The other aspect of this is that this resistance or energy that it takes to support this is the basic gravity force. And we've done a lot more mathematics on this, but we've had so much mathematics that I'm not going to go into that today. Once you've established this basic substructure of the atom, you can derive standard gravity laws. You know, they all fall out from it. The other thing that falls out from the same thing is anti-gravity, can be also derived from the same phenomena. Thanks. I've done some experimental work on relating this to various atomic weights, and if you've got a flowing through a T-field energy flowing through into an atomic structure, all the atoms are obviously in vibration. The T-field flows are vibrating to sustain it, and you've got basic particles with unique frequencies. And it turns out that each atomic element has a unique frequency. We've measured some of this stuff in the lab. Electronic frequency, turns out that it's you've got a direct function here of atomic weight versus the frequency. And this is the base equation here. And right now the F0 and the K1 are obviously the main things that it'll take to figure out this equation and do some effects. But those are proprietary, so please don't ask me what they are. One of the things that Nieper claimed in his book were that the frequency are in the centimeter band, but we've found that the frequencies for an atomic structure range just about across the entire spectrum. This is a chart that I gave at the Keeley talk 2 years ago. And this was an experiment done by a Dr. X. He's a friend of mine. He wishes to remain anonymous. But he has about 4 PhDs. He has a PhD in nuclear chemistry, a PhD in nuclear physics, and a couple other PhDs. So he's got background that wouldn't quit. And I was telling him one time about Keeley and some of the free energy ideas that I had. And he says, well, you might be interested in an experiment, an accident that I had in the lab here a couple years ago. This was a number of years ago from today. And so he got out his old lab notebooks. He went to the garage and dug them out and showed me what he had done. He had taken a quartz tube, just ordinary quartz glass tube that was about 2 inches on the inside in diameter. He put a barium titanate ultrasonic transducer affixed to the bottom of this tube, and he put water in it. What he was trying to do, he had a contract with the wine industry to do precipitation of unwanted particles out of the wine. It turns out that some of the bad tastes in wine are due to certain chemicals, and they have a particular particulate size. So he had done some ultrasonic work before to eliminate certain size particles based on frequency. And so what he was going to do was pulse a column of wine that had with different frequencies and have ways of segmenting the various particles in the wine and pulling it off. And to test this basic concept, he was setting up some equipment and was using water, and he was having some problem with it. He had pure water in the tube, and he was providing a ultrasonic frequency that was setting up standing waves in the tube. And one of the problems he was having was that the standing waves here, well, he was pumping enough energy in that the water was boiling off a little bit from the tube. And the result was that he'd lose his standing wave tuning. So what he did was he put a transducer on here and put a feedback into the ultrasonic generator so that he could continuously maintain a standing wave in there. It's a fairly standard feedback capability in science. And he started the whole experiment at 40 kilohertz. And since he adjusted the column water continuously to keep a standing wave in there, as the water boiled off, the frequency would naturally go up because the distance here of the water coming up and bouncing off this surface and coming back down was getting shorter and shorter as the water boiled off. One of the results, the most spectacular thing that happened was that his last measurement was at 41,300, and he looked up, he'd just written down this frequency, and he looked up at the tube and the water was gone in it. And so he thought he'd probably gotten a cavitation bubble, which does happen when you're pumping a lot of power into a system like this. And it had just splattered out onto the lab table. And so he got up and checked the lab, and there was no water on the table. So he thought, well, it probably had a real big bubble, and it splattered it on the ceiling. So he looked up there, and there was a very clean hole right through the ceiling, the exact inside diameter of the tube. And this kind of surprised him. So he got up on the lab bench, looked up through the hole, and there was a clean hole up through the ceiling, up through the roof, and he could see blue sky out there. And this scared him so badly that he abandoned the total concept altogether, because he lived in the Bay Area there in just south of San Francisco, and he didn't want something like this maybe going off inadvertently and killing a lot of people, because he obviously had something pretty dangerous here. But it turns out that this frequency is within 1% the frequency that Keeley gave to dissociate water. So there was correlation. The other interesting thing is that the graph I showed previously, we derived that graph totally independently of this experiment, and I went back and checked, and it turns out that this frequency correlates with that graph 100%. I was supposed to have this at the end. That's all right.
Do you run the experiments since then yourself?
No. It bothers me for the same reason.
On that experiment, do you know how much power the ultrasonic amplifier was putting into the water?
600 watts.
600 watts.
Yeah. About 2 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of seeing what I thought was a free energy demonstration. A Dr. Phillips, I think he was here for a couple hours at the symposium. Did anybody get to see his demo? Guess not. Anyway, he was the inventor of the cordless telephone and also invented some other things. And he has a patent that he's just gotten recently in the last few years on converting RF to direct current. And turns out that Dr. Phillips is a big fan of Tesla, and he supposedly derived this circuit from analyzing the Tesla coil, which one of the reasons I brought it up here, I thought people here might be interested. I did some preliminary tests on his device, and it definitely appears to be getting free energy with a OUO of 5x. So it was the measurements I made. He was driving a standing wave with a standard CB radio, and he was putting 3.5 watts into it, 3.5 or 4 watts. And I measured 20 watts coming out of one circuit of the device. And he had 2 of these circuits, and they were both outputting 20 watts. So just one circuit alone got 5x improvement in power. And next slide. Those of you that are interested in experimenting with it, this is the circuit. It's very simple. Anybody with a little bit of lab equipment could test it out. I haven't had a chance to do detailed tests, so I'd never get up and say it was a free energy device, but preliminary tests indicate it might be. Next. Some other crazy stuff that I'm working on. Michael mentioned that I'm working on medical electronics. Turns out there was some research done by Dr. Dotto. He's an Italian researcher. He was here in the United States. And he was hired by one of the big cancer research foundations to do some research on cancer cells and to find out if there was any correlation to frequency and phenomena having to do with the DNA structure and cancer. So it turns out that cancerous cells are kind of cells that have gone nuts. Their DNA has gotten wild of whack, and they were interested if he could measure this kind of a phenomena with instrumentation. And one of the things that, if you get into a lot of cancer research, one of the things that does affect and apparently have a big effect on creating cancer are toxins in your system. Environment apparently is a lot of the new studies on radiation, and also nuclear type of radiation does have bad effects and produce cancer in the body. Stress, I give some of the ways of possibly reducing these. Stress you can reduce with meditation. Environment, I guess you just have to move out of the environment. Toxins you can eliminate with proper diet. One of the things that they did find was that they measured the DNA helical coil in different age groups of people. And they found that the number of base pairs, if anybody's into biology, they know what a base pair is. There's 4 base pairs in the DNA structure, adenosine, and I can't remember some of the others, but anyhow, there's 4 base pairs, and it turns out that these number of base pairs, if you've got a helix here, and you've got so many base pairs of this DNA basic building blocks building up each turn of the DNA. And it turns out that at age 46, at conception, you've got 46 of these base pairs per turn. In other words, the coil is quite loosely wound. By the 6th week of pregnancy, it's reduced down to 36 base pairs per turn. At 2 years, it's down to 22. At 21, it's 14. And it seems to level out around 10 between 35 and 55, and then it turns to hell after 55 and eventually die. Well, what happens here is that because the DNA coil is tightening more and more, the scanning mechanisms, and this is the other thing that Dotto found, was that there is an electronic scanning mechanism that goes through the body and causes the DNA to reproduce itself. And the tighter these turns get, the more difficult it is for the DNA to properly reproduce itself. And this is why, as you get older, you become more subject to disease, because all those little coils in your body are getting tightened up. So what he did some experiments on was to see if there could be some way of charging the cells and hence the DNA with more energy, and possibly giving a boost to the DNA and keeping it from tightening up so much. And what he did was he treated the body. They did these tests first of all on mice and various laboratory animals that had cancers, and they treated them. They treated the body with a large ring that scanned the body that was pulsing at a proper frequency, huge amounts of current, like 20,000 to 200,000 Gauss that were going through this thing at extremely low voltages. And they were able to cure the cancer in every single laboratory animal that they had. So they received permission to try this on humans, and they also had the same effect. But the other thing that happened was that people that were subjected to this device over a period of up to 6 months, they could actually regress their body. And it turned out that by pumping the right amount of energy in at the right frequency, you could change the number of base pairs per turn, which caused the body to rejuvenate itself. And right now we're working on a handheld device, and preliminary research indicates it may be working, but it's too early to really tell. But I just thought I might give you a preview of some things that are happening. You know, it's possible the age can be regressed. It sounds pretty flaky, but it'll be interesting. I'll study anything if it's got a possibility of doing something that'll help humanity. One of the things that does happen when you charge the body is that it increases cellular vitality. Toxins are eliminated because the DNA is charged up. You get more energy in there. That's it. That's all. Thank you.
When you say that the body's rejuvenated 20 to 50 years, what sort of, how did they come to those figures? Is it something to do with the appearance of the person? Or?
The skin is rejuvenated. The overall vitality, the metabolism, and everything is improved to a totally healthy state. And like skin tone is improved. One of the measures of skin tone is the amount of, if you pinch your skin, the more skin you can get, the less the poorer your skin tone is. And you can measure skin tone in this way, and one of the things that this device does, it tremendously improves skin tone.
About the color of the hair, if you have rain, it goes away?
I don't know. I still got gray hair. Question?
One of the other speakers was talking about John Keeling as a charlatan, a joke who's been promoting. Are we talking about the same person?
Yes, it was the same person.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, sorry. She asked, one of the previous speakers apparently said that John Keeley was a fake and a charlatan. And as far as and then she asked, is this the same person that I was talking about here? And yes, it is the same person. I don't agree that Keeley was a charlatan. I think there is some question about some of the things he had in his lab. But I've done a very thorough research of Mr. Keeley's work, and just the fact that this frequency correlates 100% in the dissociation experiment with his frequency that he gave for dissociating water, to me validates a tremendous amount of Keeley research. So yes, it is the same person, and I disagree with the previous discussions that happen on Keely. By the way, Dale Pond is in the audience. He's has Sympathetic Vibratory Physics magazine and also the Delta Spectrum Research, and he's dedicated all of his time and energies that he has available from a normal work to researching Keely and various Keely effects. So there are some interesting things having to do with Keely, and I'd enjoin people to go look at it. And the information that came out yesterday was from the Scientific American, and what happened was that they went in and analyzed Keely's lab. There was a large sphere, huge sphere, weighed many tons, I think it was 5 tons or something. It was buried underneath the laboratory, and what this sphere was, according to the Scientific American, was a compressed air sphere. And if you go back and do some research on Keely, there's a newspaper reference where a newspaper reporter came into the Keely lab one day to see what he'd been working on. Keely was kind of a noted and as well as a notorious person at that time. This is back in the late 1800s. And this large sphere was sitting on the laboratory floor, and he had torn up a lot of the floorboards. And the reporter asked Mr. Keely, "What are you going to do with that sphere?" And he says, "Well, I don't need it anymore. For my experiments, I'm going to get rid of it." And the reporter looked at him rather incredulously because this sphere weighed about 5 tons. Mr. Keely strapped on, this was in the newspaper account, he strapped on a device that was right over his solar plexus. He struck a few chords with a tuning fork and touched the wire to this large sphere, and it lifted up off the ground. He then pushed the sphere over this hole that he had in his laboratory. He reversed some mechanism on this belt device, and the sphere lowered right down to the ground, and then he just kept this device on, and the sphere just sunk right into the earth. And he just buried the sphere right underneath the lab, and I guess he obviously covered it up, and that's what the Scientific American found, was this large sphere. But as far as him being a fake, I don't believe it.
What would be a good source to find more information on the Tesla field that you were describing, T-field?
The T-field? Thanks for answering that. I have a paper in there that describes that to a lot of extent.
And the name?
It's T-field something energy. I don't remember the whole thing. It's got a green cover in the lab. I mean in the bookstore.
Does that go into the patent by Phillips?
Pardon?
Does that cover that patent by Phillips?
The question was, does this cover the patent by Phillips? No, it doesn't. You can order the patent from the patent office. It explains everything in the patent about how he built it. The circuit is so simple that even I can understand it.
How long can you expect to live using that technology?
I don't know. The studies that they did, this was all secret research that was given to me by a person that worked on the experiments, and he was supposed to be under a death threat if he ever told anybody, and he obviously was not going to become known. But he claimed that they had done experiments and were able to sustain life. People that were 60 years old, they regressed them back to about 35 or 40, which is probably in your prime as far as physical and mental alertness and everything goes. And it turns out that you have to keep recharging a person about every 2 weeks with a 20-minute scan of this device to keep their metabolism, their DNA, and everything charged up. Otherwise, they'll start aging again.
Slower watch phenomenon that was talked about earlier in this program?
No, that operates on a different effect. That's a very low frequency, I think around the Schumann frequency, 7 or 8 cycles per second. And the frequency of this youth machine, that I call it, is up in the megahertz range. The DNA is quite small, it's microscopic, and I guess I'm getting told to leave, huh?
I found a copy of the book in the bookstore. That's what it looks like.
This was the question I think that you asked, T-field, energy research. Thanks, Michael.
Okay.
Am I done? Well, I have to cut it off here. One more question.
The DNA tightens with age, then why are there fewer base pairs of return?
Well, as you tighten, you'd have fewer base pairs that can go all around in one circle. If the coil was big, you could have a lot of base pairs, and if the coil was small, you could have a small number of them. That's all. I have to cut it off. Thank you very much.